The most dangerous thing you can do to a system designed to exploit you is become boring. You must not become defeated. You must not become broken. You must not become checked out or cynical. You must simply become boring. And I do not mean boring as in lifeless, dull, or lacking in passion. I mean boring as in completely ungovernable. I mean becoming utterly unpredictable by their metrics and invisible to their algorithms. You must become entirely useless to their extraction machines. The system cannot sell a new product to someone who simply does not want anything more. It cannot control someone who refuses to react to manufactured outrage. They cannot manipulate someone whose nervous system isn't perpetually on fire. This is the profound truth that Henry David Thoreau understood back in 1845. It is the core of ancient Stoic philosophy. Thoreau walked into the woods near Walden Pond with an axe. He carried some borrowed tools and a plan that everyone around him called absolutely insane. His neighbors in Concord called it a retreat. They thought he was giving up. They saw a young Harvard-educated man wasting his potential, but they were entirely wrong. They called it a retreat, but Henry David Thoreau called it a war. By the end of this exploration, you will understand the profound difference between the two. You will see exactly why the boring life is never the consolation prize of the uninspired. It is the ultimate victory. Living a deliberately boring life is the final boss move. But here is the critical part that society never tells you. There is a specific mechanism required to make this work. There is a necessary psychological shift. Without this internal Stoic shift, simplicity just feels like miserable deprivation. Without it, boredom becomes pure torture. Withdrawal feels like weakness and failure, but with it, you become untouchable. We will get to that psychological shift. But first, you need to see exactly how deep the trap actually goes. You need to understand the cage you are living in. Here is a question that should deeply disturb you. Why are you so incredibly tired? I am not talking about physical fatigue. We will set physical tiredness aside for now. I am talking about being exhausted emotionally, psychologically, and spiritually. If that word makes you flinch, ask yourself this. Why do you wake up so many mornings already drained? Why does the mere thought of another day sometimes feel like a massive crushing weight instead of a gift? You have probably spent years blaming yourself for this exhaustion. You blame your lack of discipline. You blame your poor sleep habits. You tell yourself that you just do not have enough purpose or drive in life. Maybe you have frantically Googled burnout symptoms late at night and nodded along to every bullet point. But what if this deep, bone-crushing exhaustion is not actually a bug in your character at all? What if this exhaustion is the actual product? The economic model of the 21st century does not run on your physical labor anymore. Not primarily. It runs entirely on your attention and your emotional bandwidth. The machine runs on your reactions. It fuels itself with your constant engagement. It feeds on every single notification that lights up your screen. It metabolizes every engineered outrage cycle you scroll through. It thrives on every carefully crafted cliffhanger in a streaming series designed to keep you awake. It consumes your life through every infinite scroll. It feeds on every fear-based news headline that spikes your pulse. These constant interruptions are not accidental side effects of a beautifully connected world. They are the core features of the system. You are not using these digital platforms. You are being metabolized by them. And here is what makes this modern trap particularly sinister. The system has successfully convinced you that constant stimulation equals actually living. They have sold you the lie that motion means progress. They have taught you that a calendar completely stuffed full of obligations equals personal importance. They have convinced an entire generation that relentless hustle equals finding your true life's purpose. So, you chase and you chase and you chase the next milestone. You run on the treadmill and you call it ambition. You sacrifice your peace and you call it building a future. But look at the architects of this system. Look at the ones who actually built this massive attention economy. What do they do with their own lives? They send their children to expensive tech-free schools. They retreat to quiet analog hobbies in nature. They practice deep meditation in completely silent rooms. They read physical paper books, and they read them very slowly. They sell you endless chaos, and they use the profits to buy themselves absolute calm. This is not some wild conspiracy theory. This is a public confession. These powerful people have stated this openly in interviews. The very same executives who design apps to maximize your daily screen time act differently at home. They strictly and aggressively limit their own children's access to the exact screens they sell to you. Why do they do this? Because they know something dangerous. They know something you are only just beginning to suspect. They know that the continuously stimulated mind is a captured mind. A mind that cannot sit in silence is a mind that is easily enslaved. Let us look back at 1845. Henry David Thoreau was 27 years old at the time. He was highly educated at Harvard. He was the son of a successful pencil manufacturer. He could have chosen to do anything respectable with his life. He could have followed the standard script of success. Instead of chasing wealth, he borrowed an axe. He deliberately walked away from the noise and into the woods. He built a tiny cabin on land owned by his friend Ralph Waldo Emerson. It was incredibly small. The cabin was just 10 by 15 feet. It had one single room, one door, and one window on each side. It was the absolute definition of a boring, minimal existence, but it was a fortress of intentionality. In that tiny space, he planted beans in the dirt. He read the ancient words of Homer. He watched small ants fight on a tree stump. He watched them with the intense focus of a seasoned observer studying a great war. He spent hours upon hours just sitting completely still. He did not check a feed. He did not respond to urgent messages. To his busy, industrious neighbors in Concord, Massachusetts, this looked like massive failure. They saw a young man with endless potential actively wasting his life. He was refusing to marry. He was refusing to build generational wealth. He was actively refusing to participate in their bustling society. But Thoreau was not running away from society out of fear. He was not a coward fleeing responsibility. He was a scientist of the soul, conducting a radical experiment on human existence. He was seeking the ultimate truth. He famously wrote, "I went to the woods because I wished to live deliberately." He wanted to front only the absolute essential facts of life. He wanted to see if he could not learn what life had to teach him. He feared that if he did not do this, he would reach the end of his days, only to discover that he had not actually lived. He was terrified of dying without ever having experienced true, unmediated existence. Read those powerful words again and let them sink into your mind. Not when I came to die, discover that I had not lived. This profound realization is the beating heart of Stoic philosophy. It is the ultimate wake-up call. This journey to the woods was never just about nature worship. It was never about escaping hard work or adult responsibility. It was about a man who looked critically at the trajectory everyone expected him to blindly follow. He looked at the relentless pursuit of more, and he asked a question that still burns intensely today. What if most of what we eagerly call living is actually just a highly sophisticated form of dying very slowly? What if our celebrated busyness is just a socially acceptable way to numb ourselves? What if our packed schedules are just shields we use to avoid the terrifying reality of actually being alone with our own thoughts? Thoreau was absolutely not hiding at Walden Pond. He was actively hunting. He was hunting for the pure, clear signal underneath all the deafening noise of society. To find that rare signal, he had to subtract. He had to subtract ruthlessly and without apology. He spent exactly 2 years, 2 months, and 2 days living inside that tiny cabin. He lived through the freezing winters and the humid summers, stripping away the excess. And when he finally emerged from the woods, he did not just come back with a sense of gentle peace and passive tranquility. He came back armed with a powerful weapon. He came back with a book so quietly savage. This book was so deeply disruptive that it has been fueling global revolutions ever since it was published. Mahatma Gandhi read his words, and found power. Martin Luther King Jr. studied his philosophy deeply. His quiet observations influenced massive civil rights movements across entirely different continents and across multiple centuries. And all of this world-changing impact came from a man who simply planted beans. It came from a man who spent his afternoons watching ants and observing the ice melt. He lived a life that was unforgivably, powerfully, and strategically boring. And that boredom changed the entire course of human history. Let us bring this back to your reality today. Let us talk about what is actually happening physically inside your brain right now. Think about the moment you receive a notification on your smartphone. It truly does not matter what kind of notification it is. It could be an email, a like, or a breaking news alert. Instantly, your prefrontal cortex lights up. A surge of dopamine floods right through your neural pathways. The core reward pathway in your brain rapidly activates. This is exactly the same neurological circuitry that is involved in compulsive gambling. It is the exact same pathway hijacked by intense substance abuse. It is the engine of every destructive, compulsive behavior known to mankind. The brilliant engineers sitting in Silicon Valley know this extremely well. They have testified about it openly, under oath in front of lawmakers. They have written best-selling books, openly confessing to these manipulative designs. But here is the massive twist that almost no one discusses in daily life. It is not actually the pleasure of the notification that hooks you. Pleasure alone is not enough to create such unbreakable chains. What truly enslaves your mind is the unpredictability. Slot machines in a casino do not addict desperate people because they reliably pay out money. They addict people because sometimes they pay out and sometimes they do not. This is known as the intermittent reinforcement schedule. It is the single most powerful behavioral conditioning tool ever discovered by psychology. Your smartphone is a highly polished slot machine that you carry in your pocket. It is a slot machine that the average person eagerly checks 96 times every single day, hoping for a random digital payout. And every single time you check that screen, whether it delivers a hit of validation or absolutely nothing, the psychological loop grows stronger. The neural pathways thicken. The behavioral addiction deepens its roots. Now take a step back and apply this terrifying concept to your entire modern life. Think about your social media usage. It provides a constant drip of intermittent validation to soothe your ego and your insecurities. Think about the relentless 24-hour news cycles. They are perfectly engineered to deliver intermittent waves of deep fear, followed by tiny moments of relief, keeping you perpetually anxious and engaged. Think about modern relationships that are entirely mediated through digital apps. They offer nothing but the shallow promise of intermittent connection, leaving you profoundly lonely despite being constantly reachable. Think about your demanding work emails arriving at all hours of the day and night. They create a false sense of intermittent urgency that never allows your nervous system to truly power down and find genuine rest. Your delicate nervous system is being masterfully played like a finely tuned musical instrument. And the only song it is learning how to play is the song of absolute dependency. It forgets how to generate its own rhythm. When absolutely everything in your life is designed to be exciting, nothing truly is. When everything is labeled as urgent, nothing actually matters anymore. The constant state of high alert destroys your inner compass. When you are always artificially stimulated by external forces, you slowly lose the vital capacity to generate your own internal motivation. You become entirely dependent on the machine to tell you how to feel. You fundamentally transform into a reactor rather than a conscious actor. You wait for the world to poke you before you move. And people who merely react are incredibly easy for the system to reliably predict. Reactors are exceptionally easy to emotionally manipulate. They are incredibly easy to harvest for data, for attention, and for profit. To break this cycle, you must look to the wisdom of those who understood empty space. There is a brilliant historical parallel that might completely reshape how you view your current situation. In ancient China, long before the digital age, there was a profound philosopher named Lao Tzu. He was the legendary founder of Taoism. He wrote a deeply mystical and philosophical text called the Tao Te Ching. It consists of 81 very short poetic passages filled with immense quiet power. It is a book so brief that you can read the entire thing in less than an hour, yet so deep it takes a lifetime to understand. In one specific passage, Lao Tzu thoughtfully describes the true usefulness of a simple clay bowl. He asks the reader a vital question: what exactly makes a bowl useful? He explains that the true value is not found in the clay itself. The usefulness is not the material that forms the hard outer structure. The true usefulness of the bowl is found entirely in the emptiness inside. It is the hollow, boring space that gives the bowl its entire purpose. Without that empty void, the bowl cannot hold water. It cannot sustain life. Lao Tzu beautifully applies this profound concept of emptiness to the rooms in our houses. A room is only useful because of the empty space inside the walls. He applies it to the hub of a wheel and eventually to life itself. True usefulness and true potential always arise from what is deliberately not there. Henry David Thoreau understood this ancient wisdom instinctively when he walked away from the crowded streets of Concord. His entire grand project at Walden Pond was an exercise in radical subtraction. His goal was to aggressively strip away absolutely everything inessential from his daily existence until only the core remained. He wanted to reduce life to its absolute lowest terms. Then and only then could he truly examine it. Once he found that irreducible core, his plan was to live fiercely and deeply from that place of pure authenticity. But here is what most modern people completely miss about Thoreau's experiment. This was not minimalism practiced as some shallow aesthetic preference. This was not about making a space look clean for a photograph. This was absolutely not about decluttering your closet so you can post about it on Instagram. This is not the modern trend of Marie Kondo politely asking you if your folded socks spark joy in your heart. What Thoreau practiced was strategic emptiness. It was a calculated philosophical clearing of the mental and physical decks. Because when your life is stuffed completely full of minor obligations, you are trapped. When your mind is constantly flooded with cheap stimulation and deafening noise, you have absolutely zero capacity left for what actually matters. Your bowl is entirely full of mud, leaving no room for clear water. You spend your days so incredibly busy responding to the demands of others that you never take a moment to initiate anything of your own. You become a lifelong passenger in a vehicle you were meant to drive. You are so busy endlessly consuming content created by other people that you completely forget how to create anything yourself. You mistake the act of consumption for the act of living, which is a fatal error. You are so busy performing the exhausting theater of productivity for your peers that you never actually produce a single thing that will outlast you. You build sandcastles right at the edge of a rising digital tide. The completely full calendar is not a badge of honor. It is a cleverly disguised trap. The incredibly busy schedule is a tightly locked prison that you willingly build for yourself bar by invisible bump day after day. And the truly cruel joke of it all is that modern society loudly applauds you for locking yourself inside this prison. They see your exhaustion and they praise it. They say, "She is so busy, she must be incredibly successful." They look at the man destroying his health and say, "He never stops working. He answers emails at midnight. He must be a very important person." But this is a grand illusion. This is the lie of the extraction machine. No, being perpetually busy is very often just a cowardly way to hide. It is a highly effective shield used to avoid confronting the most terrifying question a human being can ever ask themselves in the quiet hours. That terrifying question is simply this: what would I actually do with my life if I had absolutely nothing to react to? If the emails stopped, if the feed went dark, who would you be in that sudden, deafening silence? Most people have absolutely no idea who they are without their distractions. And that profound lack of self-knowledge frightens them so deeply to their very core that they will frantically fill every single moment. They will endure crushing stress just to avoid sitting alone in an empty room with their own unfiltered thoughts. Thoreau, however, chose to sit alone with that exact terrifying question for over 2 years in the woods. He did not run from the silence. He let it wash over him until it stopped being scary and started being clarifying. And the profound truths he found within that deep, boring silence ended up changing the world forever. There is a vital psychological concept that you have likely never been taught in school. It is the concept of boredom tolerance. Building an extremely high tolerance for pure boredom is an essential survival skill. In fact, in the modern age of endless digital distraction, boredom tolerance might be the single most important cognitive skill you can possibly develop. It is the ultimate superpower in an attention-starved economy. In the late 1960s and 1970s, a prominent psychologist named Walter Mischel conducted a highly famous experiment at Stanford University. It is widely known today as the Stanford Marshmallow Test. In this experiment, young children were brought into a sparse room and given a very simple choice. The researcher placed one single marshmallow on the table in front of them and explained the critical rules of the game. The child could eat that one marshmallow right now, immediately satisfying their craving, or if they could wait entirely alone in the room for 15 agonizing minutes without eating it, they would be given 2 marshmallows. The researchers tracked these children for decades afterward. The kids who successfully waited, the ones who managed to tolerate the intense, boring discomfort of delay, went on to have vastly better outcomes in life. They succeeded across nearly every measurable metric of human well-being. They achieved significantly higher academic success. They maintained better physical health and lower stress levels well into adulthood. They built much stronger, more resilient relationship stability. They even achieved greater long-term financial security. For many decades, psychologists widely interpreted this as a simple study about raw willpower. They thought it was just about who could clench their fists and resist temptation the hardest. But much more recent and nuanced research suggests something far deeper and more fascinating was actually happening in that room. The children who successfully waited 15 minutes were not simply exercising massive, exhausting willpower. Willpower alone runs out too fast. Instead, these children had intuitively developed brilliant mental strategies. They had found incredibly creative ways to reframe the painful boredom of waiting. They sang silly songs quietly to themselves. They stared at the ceiling and told themselves complex, imaginative stories to pass the time. They actively made the very act of waiting itself an interesting and engaging experience. They did not just stubbornly resist the marshmallow with brute force. They fundamentally transformed their relationship to time. This powerful cognitive reframing is exactly what Henry David Thoreau did when he moved to Walden Pond. He did not go there to the woods to stubbornly suffer through the brutal monotony of crushing rural isolation. He did not sit in his cabin gritting his teeth, desperately wishing he was back at a lively dinner party in town. Instead, he systematically and patiently rebuilt his own mental capacity to deeply perceive the world around him. He actively retrained his fractured attention span over months of quiet observation. He pushed through the initial pain of withdrawal until his brain fully adapted. He resensitized his dopamine receptors to the natural world. He did this until a single quiet morning spent simply watching the winter ice slowly melt on the surface of the pond became an intensely vivid experience. It became richer and more profoundly meaningful than anything else. That simple, boring act of watching ice melt became more fulfilling than years of frantic social busywork and town gossip had ever been. He learned how to extract massive meaning from the smallest, quietest details of existence. Thoreau wrote a line that perfectly captures this awakening. To be awake is to be alive. I have never yet met a man who was quite awake. When you truly read that line, you realize it is not a gentle, poetic observation. That line is a brutal, stinging indictment of modern society. He is absolutely not talking about physical sleep. He is not talking about people being tired in their beds. He is talking about the waking coma of the masses. He is talking about the state of chronic low-grade distraction that currently passes for normal consciousness in most people's daily lives. You probably think you are wide awake right now as you move through your day, but the harsh, stoic truth is that you are likely just heavily stimulated. Being stimulated by external triggers and being truly consciously awake are absolutely not the same thing. In fact, they are often total opposites. I want you to start thinking about your daily attention as a strictly finite, incredibly precious resource. You must view it this way, because biologically and neurologically, that is exactly what it is. It is exhaustible. Every single morning when you wake up, you are granted a very specific, limited amount of cognitive capacity. You have a finite amount of emotional bandwidth to process the complexities and frustrations of the world. You have a strictly limited number of high-quality, complex decisions you can safely make before your mental judgment begins to significantly degrade. This is not a philosophical theory. It is a scientifically established fact. Psychologists have a specific name for this exact phenomenon. They call it decision fatigue, or sometimes ego depletion. The mental fuel tank inside your brain is very real, and it empties out steadily with every choice you make. Now, facing this biological reality here is the most critical question you must ask yourself every day. Who exactly is spending the precious fuel inside your tank? Are you spending it, or are algorithms stealing it? When you reach for your phone to check the chaotic global news, the very first thing in the morning, you are heavily spending that precious fuel. You are draining the tank before your feet have even touched the bedroom floor. When you allow yourself to engage in a pointless, heated outrage cycle in the comments section of social media, you are spending your life force. You are giving your power to a stranger who does not care about you at all. When you politely say yes to a social obligation that you do absolutely not want to attend, simply out of guilt or habit, you are spending heavily. You are bankrupting your own peace of mind to maintain a fake image. When you allow someone else's manufactured emergency or poor planning to immediately become your top priority, you are spending your most valuable resource. By noon, the average modern person is completely bankrupt. They are running entirely on fumes, fueled only by caffeine and pure anxiety. They start making incredibly poor reactive choices because all the high-quality cognitive fuel was burned up hours ago on absolute nonsense. And at the end of this exhausting, depleting day, what do they actually have to show for all that burned energy? They have absolutely nothing that they consciously chose. They have built nothing of lasting, permanent value. They have experienced nothing that they will clearly remember in a year or even in a week. Their entire day was just one long, frantic series of panicked reactions to other people's loudly imposed agendas and demands. This is exactly why Thoreau's incredibly boring life in the woods was economically and philosophically brilliant. He spent almost nothing during those 2 years. And I am not just talking about his financial spending. More importantly, he spent almost none of his precious attention on the noise of the world. He fiercely protected his limited cognitive resources with the exact same intensity that a greedy miser fiercely protects his gold. At Walden Pond, there were absolutely no tedious social obligations to fulfill. There was no horrifying daily news of distant bloody wars to spike his anxiety. There were no exhausting fashion trends to constantly keep up with. There was absolutely no toxic town gossip to navigate. There were no artificially manufactured urgencies demanding his immediate panicked response. There were only the quiet, undeniably essential facts of raw existence. He stacked these simple facts up. He examined them under the clear light of unhurried time. He deeply understood them, and from that heavily protected, heavily guarded fortress of mental wealth and intense focus, he created. He produced brilliant philosophical work that still continues to pay massive cultural dividends nearly 2 full centuries later. This is the ultimate power of refusing to leak your attention to the extraction machines. Here is the absolute core truth about what the current socio-economic system cannot possibly tolerate. The one thing that terrifies the machine more than anything else is a human being who simply does not want more. Think deeply about this concept for a moment. The entire massive humming machinery of modern global capitalism absolutely depends on one thing: to survive your constant manufactured and painful dissatisfaction. The system requires that you must always feel that whatever you currently have is not quite enough. It demands that you believe that whoever you currently are is fundamentally flawed and requires constant upgrading. It insists that wherever you currently are in life is not the right place, and you must constantly hustle to get somewhere else. If you did not feel this burning, painful lack, why on earth would you ever keep buying? Why would you keep scrolling endlessly through advertisements? Why would you keep chasing the empty promises of status and prestige? This is why true, deep contentment is not a passive state. It is an act of violent sabotage. I am not talking about a passive, lazy contentment where you simply give up on life and rot on the couch. I am talking about a fierce, strategic contentment. It is a highly active, highly conscious philosophical choice. It is the kind of profound contentment where you stand completely still, look calmly at the frantic, sweating masses, sprinting desperately toward mirages in the desert, and you simply decide that you will not run with them. You refuse to panic. Instead, you stay exactly where you are and you quietly plant your beans. You sit down in a comfortable chair and you read your physical books. You take the time to actually think your own original thoughts. And when you do this, the entire massive system suddenly cannot touch you anymore. Its hooks slide right off your armor. You become invincible because you have completely exited the rigged game they desperately need you to play. This quiet, stubborn refusal is exactly what made Henry David Thoreau such a profoundly dangerous man. It was not his beautiful eloquence or his Harvard education that threatened the status quo. It was his absolute refusal. He completely refused to be impressed by the wealth or status of others. He refused to be violently hurried by the ticking clock of societal expectations. He categorically refused to believe the most pervasive lie of his era. He refused to believe that his inherent worth as a human being was somehow determined by his economic productivity or the amount of physical possessions he could hoard. He detached his soul from the marketplace entirely. In another of his incredibly famous and world-shifting essays titled Civil Disobedience, Thoreau wrote one of the most haunting lines in literature: "The mass of men lead lives of quiet desperation." Let that echo. It is a chilling observation. But notice very carefully the specific grammar he used in that sentence. He absolutely did not say that the mass of men are brutally forced into these miserable lives by some outside power. He used an active verb. He said they lead those lives. They are the ones walking themselves into the prison cell. They actively choose this quiet desperation daily, mostly by completely mindless default and passive imitation. The crushing desperation that so many feel is rarely imposed from the outside by a tyrant. It is almost entirely an inside job. It is a prison built by conforming to expectations and refusing to embrace the boring, simple life. There is a highly destructive modern pathology that Thoreau never lived to see with his own eyes, but that his philosophy somehow perfectly diagnosed well in advance. Modern psychologists call it the paradox of choice. We are told that having endless options is the ultimate freedom. But the reality is that having too many options deeply paralyzes the human mind rather than liberating it. It creates constant anxiety about making the wrong choice. But I want to take this concept even deeper and much darker than just simple paralysis. Endless options are not merely paralyzing. They are incredibly dangerously expensive, and not in the financial ways you are calculating. Every single option that you stubbornly insist on keeping open in your life secretly costs you highly valuable mental real estate. Every potential path you refuse to definitively close burns precious background processing power. Every time you say, "maybe later," or "I just want to keep all my options open," you are creating a tiny, invisible leak in your limited cognitive fuel tank. You are bleeding out your focus drop by tiny drop, day after day. Highly successful and truly wealthy people understand this concept instinctively. This is the exact reason why many billionaires and creative geniuses notoriously wear the exact same simple outfit every single day of their lives. They are desperately trying to eliminate the trivial, boring, small decisions from their morning routine. They want to fiercely preserve their limited cognitive resources for the massive, complex decisions that actually matter. But wearing a uniform is only figuring out half of the equation. It is a superficial fix. The truly wise individuals, the modern-day Thoreaus of any given age, always go significantly further than just simplifying their closets. They do not just eliminate the small, annoying daily decisions. They bravely and ruthlessly eliminate entire massive categories of life that no longer serve their ultimate core purpose. They cut away entire branches of the tree. When Thoreau was living at Walden Pond, he did not just simplify his wardrobe to save a few minutes. He radically simplified his entire physical and social existence. He asked himself, what are the essential facts of life? And once he identified what was truly essential, food, shelter, thought, nature, he took a sharp axe and aggressively cut away absolutely everything else. He did not say he would do it later. He did not phase it out gradually. He executed this massive reduction immediately. He chose one single room. He chose a boring, repetitive diet of beans and rice. He chose a very small handful of profound books. He chose deep, unbroken silence. He actively chose philosophical depth over shallow breadth. He absolutely did not try to keep all his options open in town. He took a match and deliberately burned those options to the ground so he could not turn back. He did this because he deeply understood a harsh, unforgiving truth that our modern, hyper-connected culture completely refuses to admit. Endless optionality is very often just a pathetic form of cowardice, dressed up as wisdom. When you desperately try to keep absolutely every single door in the hallway open, you end up walking through none of them. You never commit. You spend your entire life standing frozen in the hallway, staring at the frames. You stand there forever, proudly congratulating yourself on your amazing flexibility and your endless potential, while the actual substance of life happens deep inside the rooms you are too afraid to fully enter and commit to. There is a fascinating historical story that perfectly reveals the absolute, unyielding depth of Thoreau's philosophical commitment to this ungovernable life. It happened in 1846, exactly 1 year into his grand Walden experiment. Thoreau was taking a quiet, boring walk from his cabin into the nearby town of Concord to simply pick up a repaired shoe from the local cobbler. It was meant to be a completely mundane, uneventful afternoon errand. While walking on the dirt road, he was suddenly stopped by the local town tax collector, a man named Sam Staples. Staples informed Thoreau that he currently owed exactly 6 years of unpaid back poll taxes to the government. The total amount owed was incredibly trivial. It was only about $1.50. Even in the economy of $1,846.50 a year was barely anything. It was a completely insignificant sum of money for the Thoreau family. Staples politely asked him to just pay the small debt so they could clear the books. But Thoreau looked at the man and flatly refused to pay it. He did not refuse because he was completely broke and could not afford the dollar. He absolutely did not refuse because he had simply forgotten about the tax in his distraction. He refused with cold, calculated, stoic intention. He refused because those specific taxes were being used to fund the government. And at that exact moment in history, that specific government was legally sanctioning the brutal institution of human slavery. Furthermore, that same government was actively waging an imperialist war against Mexico. Thoreau considered both of these actions to be profoundly, unforgivably unjust. Because of his deep moral clarity, he simply stated that he would absolutely not participate in funding this system, not even indirectly. He refused to offer even a symbolic gesture of compliance to a system he viewed as fundamentally corrupt. Sam Staples, the tax collector, was actually a friendly acquaintance who personally liked and respected Thoreau. Staples was so eager to avoid the annoying bureaucratic paperwork and the awkwardness of the situation that he quietly offered to just pay the $1.50 out of his own pocket to make the entire problem go away. But Thoreau, standing firm in his radical boredom and his unshakable Stoic principles, refused that incredibly generous offer as well. He refused to let anyone else cover his moral stance. So the law had to take its course. They arrested Henry David Thoreau right there on the dirt road. They marched him into town and locked him inside the local Concord jail cell. He spent exactly one quiet, uneventful night locked behind those iron bars. Sometime during that dark night, an anonymous person most historians strongly suspect it was his horrified aunt, though Thoreau himself never officially confirmed it, secretly paid the outstanding tax debt entirely against his wishes. Because the debt was technically cleared, the jailers unlocked the cell door and released him the very next morning. Thoreau calmly walked out, finally retrieved his repaired shoe from the cobbler, and walked quietly back to the pond. But do not underestimate the massive power of that single, seemingly boring night spent locked inside a rural jail cell. That one quiet night of confinement directly produced the fiery, world-changing essay known as Civil Disobedience. That single essay, born from a stubborn refusal to pay a trivial tax, would later cross oceans to deeply inspire Mahatma Gandhi's massive salt march in India. It provided the philosophical blueprint for peaceful, unyielding resistance. Decades later, that exact same essay would become a cornerstone text for Martin Luther King Jr. as he brilliantly orchestrated the historic Montgomery bus boycott, fundamentally changing the landscape of American civil rights forever. It heavily influenced the brave leaders of the anti-apartheid movement in South Africa. All of these massive tectonic shifts in global human history occurred simply because one quiet man in the woods refused to bend over $1. This is absolutely not the behavior of a weak man who is cowardly hiding from the harsh realities of life. This is not some form of passive, lazy withdrawal from society. This is the awesome power of a truly integrated mind. This is a man who was so incredibly sharply clear about his own internal principles that he intentionally made himself completely ungovernable. He did not fight back using physical violence or raising an armed militia. He did not fight the system using massive accumulated wealth, and he certainly did not fight it using political influence or high social status. He fought the entire massive machinery of the state using the simple weapon of refusal. And here is the crucial Stoic secret you must understand. True, unshakable refusal is only actually possible when you have already aggressively eliminated absolutely everything inessential from your own daily life. You can only stand your ground when there is absolutely nothing left that they can effectively threaten to take away from you. When your material and egoic needs are so incredibly small, their powerful leverage completely disappears. While living at Walden Pond, Thoreau meticulously recorded his daily expenses in a journal. He tracked absolutely every single cent that left his pocket. He was an accountant of his own survival, tracking the exact cost of freedom. He knew exactly down to the penny what his tiny wooden cabin cost to build. He knew exactly what his meager daily food cost. He knew precisely what his radically simple, boring life actually required to sustain itself over time. And the final mathematical number he arrived at was almost comically low. Through his rigorous, boring daily experiment, he mathematically and undeniably proved that a human being could easily meet all their actual survival needs. He proved that you could live a deeply philosophical, rich life using only an incredibly tiny fraction of the money and energy that most average panicked people constantly spent just trying to keep their heads above water. He realized that the vast majority of what people desperately worked for was not actual necessity. The rest of their exhausting labor was just deep-seated anxiety, brilliantly dressed up as practical necessity. It was just the desperate craving for social status, dressed up as a basic requirement for living. It was profound existential fear, dressed up as noble ambition. Thoreau saw right through this exhausting, never-ending charade. He wrote one of the most powerful definitions of value ever recorded. The cost of a thing is the amount of what I will call life, which is required to be exchanged for it immediately or in the long run. Read that sentence again. Let that profound concept completely sink into your bones. He is absolutely not measuring the price of a physical object in pieces of paper or gold coins. He is measuring the true ultimate price in hours and days of your actual life. Think about that massive, beautiful house you are currently working 60 exhausting hours a week just to afford. What is the actual hidden cost of that mortgage? It is not the monthly payment sent to the massive bank. The real cost asks this: how many irreplaceable years of your one single fleeting existence on this earth are you willingly exchanging just to have those few extra square feet of empty space that you barely even have time to use? Think about that shiny new promotion at work that you have been endlessly chasing for the past 3 years. What is that new job title actually buying you? In the grand scheme of your incredibly short human life, is it buying you profound peace? No. It is buying you significantly more heavy responsibility. It is buying you significantly less free time with your family. It is buying you much higher, more terrifying daily stakes. It is buying you a permanent heavy blanket of chronic stress that will slowly destroy your physical health. You are absolutely not getting ahead in the great game of life by chasing these socially mandated external prizes. You are simply getting more and more deeply entangled in a web that was expertly designed to extract your vital energy. Thoreau's piercing question effortlessly cuts right through absolutely every single modern justification. Is what you are gaining actually worth the irreplaceable life you are spending to get it? Most people never dare to ask themselves this terrifying question in the dark because they are absolutely horrified of what the answer might be. If they asked it, they might realize they have traded their one wild and precious life for a slightly nicer car and a fleeting moment of hollow applause from strangers they do not even genuinely like or respect. But let us transition from philosophy back to the hard biological realities of your brain. There is a fascinating neurological reality that deeply supports Thoreau's lifestyle, and it has profound, undeniable implications for you today. Modern neuroscience has discovered that your human brain operates in 2 primary, distinctly different modes of thought. These are known clinically as the highly focused mode and the relaxed default mode network. The focused mode is exactly what you typically think of when you use the word thinking. It is your state of highly active, intense attention. It is the gear you use for complex problem solving, learning a new skill, or writing a report. The default mode, on the other hand, is the fascinating background state that automatically activates when you are completely unfocused. It is what happens when you are not actively directing your attention at any specific task. The default mode is the realm of aimless daydreaming. It is the quiet space of seemingly unproductive mind-wandering. It is the psychological state you enter when you are simply staring blankly out of a rain-streaked window. Our modern, hyper-optimized productivity culture absolutely worships the focused mode. It demands that every single waking minute of your day must be ruthlessly optimized, monetized, and tracked for maximum output. The culture screams that every single tiny gap in your schedule must be immediately filled with high-value information. You must listen to a dense educational podcast while driving your car to work to maximize your commute. You must listen to an intense self-improvement audiobook at double speed while taking a supposedly relaxing walk in the woods. You must desperately scroll through Twitter to absorb the latest news while waiting in line for coffee. But here is the absolute, irrefutable truth that all the modern neurological research clearly shows. Your absolute, most brilliant, world-changing, and deeply creative insights will almost never come from the stressed, focused mode. They almost always emerge silently from the completely unfocused, boring default mode network. When you finally allow your exhausted mind to freely wander without a leash, your brain immediately starts doing its most important work. In the background, far below your conscious awareness, it begins rapidly connecting incredibly disparate, unrelated ideas. It starts synthesizing all the raw data you have consumed into completely new, profound paradigms. It makes massive, intuitive leaps of stunning creativity that the rigid, exhausted, highly focused attention could absolutely never ever achieve by brute force. It finds the hidden patterns in the chaotic noise of reality. If you look closely at history, absolutely every single major creative breakthrough or massive scientific paradigm shift was immediately preceded by long, boring periods of the genius seemingly doing absolutely nothing at all. Isaac Newton was not aggressively grinding away in a loud, distracting office when he revolutionized physics. He was relaxing quietly under an apple tree, letting his default mode network process the deep mysteries of the universe. The ancient mathematician Archimedes did not shout Eureka while stressed out in a crowded marketplace. He experienced his massive historic flash of profound insight while simply relaxing his muscles in a warm, quiet bath. Charles Darwin did not formulate the groundbreaking theory of evolution by constantly checking his notifications. He slowly pieced it together while taking incredibly long, silent, completely boring daily walks in the countryside. Albert Einstein famously visualized his wildly complex theories of relativity while doing the highly repetitive, boring physical task of riding his bicycle around town, letting his brilliant mind detach from forced concentration. True deep boredom is absolutely not the shameful absence of human productivity, as the modern hustle culture aggressively wants you to believe. It is the absolute, non-negotiable biological precondition for any deep, meaningful work. When Henry David Thoreau sat perfectly still on a wooden chair for hours upon hours, simply watching the surface of Walden Pond, he was not wasting a single second of his precious time. He was doing the deepest work possible. He was actively, deliberately creating the vast, empty mental space required for his masterpiece Walden to slowly emerge from the depths of his subconscious. He was building the silent forge where civil disobedience would crystallize. His radically simple, profoundly boring life in the woods ultimately produced vastly more lasting, permanent value than 1,000 frantically busy modern executives who cannot even manage to sit still in a room for 10 silent minutes. There is another powerful psychological phenomenon that explains why you are so exhausted by the modern trap. It is a biological mechanism called hedonic adaptation, and it is the invisible treadmill that is slowly grinding you down. Hedonic adaptation simply means that whatever high level of external stimulation you repeatedly expose yourself to eventually becomes your new, completely boring baseline. The brain quickly adapts to the intense noise and normalizes it. The things that used to be incredibly exciting quickly become mundane and normal. The highly extraordinary events rapidly fade into the completely ordinary background of life. The magic disappears as the dopamine receptors downregulate. This biological mechanism is exactly why ecstatic lottery winners almost always return to their previous baseline level of happiness within just a single year of winning millions. The massive shock to the system quickly wears off. It is why the intense, intoxicating thrill of buying a brand new expensive car completely fades away after just a few short months of commuting in traffic. It is why the massive dream house eventually just becomes another house to clean. But there is a very dark, dangerous side to this psychological adaptation that almost no one openly discusses. The hedonic treadmill does not just run in one direction, it is a two-way street, and the downward spiral is terrifying. If you continuously and aggressively escalate the amount of daily stimulation in your life, if you constantly seek out more drama, higher intensity, and louder excitement, you physically alter the chemical balance of your own brain. You begin to require significantly higher and higher doses of extreme stimulation just to feel absolutely anything at all. You are not actually becoming more alive by consuming all this intense content. You are actively numbing yourself. You are slowly raising your own internal threshold for feeling until only the most extreme, shocking, or terrifying experiences even register on your emotional radar. The quiet, gentle joys of life become completely invisible to you. This vicious cycle is exactly why extreme thrill seekers constantly need to find bigger, far more dangerous thrills just to feel a pulse. It is why heavy social media users constantly need to seek out increasingly outrageous and toxic content. It is why people who grow up surrounded by chaos become deeply addicted to chaos in their adult lives, even when they constantly claim they just want peace. They have biologically conditioned their nervous systems to require a catastrophe. If there is no catastrophe, they feel empty, so they subconsciously create one. Henry David Thoreau essentially ran this entire psychological experiment in complete reverse. He decided to step off the escalating treadmill of society. By radically and aggressively reducing the amount of daily stimulation in his life, he successfully lowered his own hedonic baseline down to the floor. He cleared the plaque from his dopamine receptors through intentional boredom. He deeply resensitized his own nervous system to the subtle, quiet beauty of the world, until watching a completely normal sunrise became a miraculous, spiritually moving event. He cured his own numbness through radical deprivation. He stayed in the quiet woods until the simple cracking sound of winter ice shifting on the surface of the frozen pond sounded like a grand, sweeping symphony to his ears. He retrained his brain to find massive joy in the microscopic. He stayed until the completely ordinary, mundane act of daily existence became intensely, brilliantly vivid once again. He absolutely did not escape from real life by going to the woods. He intensified real life by subtracting the fake noise. And here is what deeply bothers me about how Thoreau is usually presented in modern classrooms and polite society. They purposefully sand off all his sharp, dangerous edges. They try to turn a radical philosopher into a harmless mascot. They insist on making him out to be just a gentle nature poet. They portray him as a harmless, slightly eccentric old man who simply enjoyed taking long walks and looking at pretty pine trees. They completely strip away his intense fire. They desperately try to domesticate his memory. They neuter his incredibly dangerous philosophy and attempt to turn his blazing anti-establishment manifesto into a comforting, softly painted greeting card sold in a suburban gift shop. But Henry David Thoreau was a true radical. And I do not mean radical in the shallow, tribal, political sense that we use the word on the internet today. I mean radical in the deepest original Latin sense of the word radix, meaning root. He bypassed the superficial symptoms and went straight down to the absolute root of human existence. And what he uncovered down there in the dirt was deeply uncomfortable for the society of his time, and it remains uncomfortable today. He found that the vast majority of what we proudly call civilized society is actually just a massive unspoken conspiracy of continuous distraction designed to keep people working hard and completely asleep at the wheel. He found that most of what we blindly chase and celebrate as success is actually just a significantly more sophisticated and comfortable form of voluntary slavery, where the chains are made of debt and the whip is made of status. Anxiety. He found that most of what we politely call life is really just a long, exhausting rehearsal for a grand performance that absolutely never actually happens. We spend decades preparing to live, and then we quietly die in the wings. He wrote one of the most famous and fiercely independent declarations in American literature. If a man does not keep pace with his companions, perhaps it is because he hears a different drummer. Let him step to the music which he hears. Let him step to the music which he hears, however measured or far away. Modern culture loves to quote this line, but they completely misunderstand it. They think this is just a gentle, warm permission slip to be a little bit quirky or weird. But this profound quote is absolutely not a permission slip. It is a highly accurate clinical diagnosis of the human condition. If you find yourself constantly out of step with the frantic, exhausting hustle of the modern world around you, if you feel deeply alienated by the endless scrolling, the mindless consuming, and the desperate posturing, maybe you are not actually broken at all. Maybe there is absolutely nothing wrong with your brain or your ambition. Maybe, just maybe, You are the only one who is actually hearing the real, authentic music playing softly underneath all the deafening manufactured noise that absolutely everyone else is blindly, unconsciously marching to right now. So where does all of this heavy philosophy and neuroscience actually leave you today in this hyper-connected, deeply exhausted modern moment? I am absolutely not going to insult your intelligence by giving you a cheap 3-step action plan. I am not going to offer you a life hack or a quick fix. The immense, crushing weight of Thoreau's life lesson cannot possibly be aggressively reduced and squeezed into a digestible, easy-to-read bullet point list for a social media post. But what I will ask you to do is something significantly harder. I will ask you to sit alone with a very specific, deeply terrifying question. I want you to actually sit in silence with it. Do not just glance at it and immediately scroll away. Do not just ponder it for a fleeting moment while you are waiting at a traffic light. Sit with this question for hours. Sit with it for days, if that is what is necessary to break through the armor. Let it completely unravel your current reality. Ask yourself this: what would actually remain of your daily existence if you aggressively subtracted absolutely everything from your life that is only there out of blind habit, deep-seated fear, or the desperate imitation of other people? I am not asking what you think should remain in an ideal world. I am not asking what would look good on a resume or what would sound impressive to others. I am certainly not asking what your parents, your culture, or your social circle expect. I am asking what would actually physically remain if you took an axe and violently stripped away every single thing you only do because you feel you are supposed to. What is actually yours and what is just rented programming, that tiny irreducible core that is left over. Whatever truth survives that massive burning subtraction, that is exactly where your real, authentic life is currently hiding, buried under decades of accumulated societal debris. The profound tragedy is that most people will absolutely never find that hidden core before they die. They will never find it because the deafening noise of their current, distracted life is just far too warm, far too easy, and far too comfortable. The endless digital distraction is just too incredibly convenient. The exhausting, soul-crushing busyness is far too highly praised and rewarded by the extraction machine. It is much easier to just stay busy than to face the terrifying void. And so they end up dying quietly in the long hallway of life. They die standing there, staring at the closed doors, having never once summoned the courage to actually turn the knob, walk inside, and inhabit the room of their own existence. But Henry David Thoreau turned the knob. He entered the room. For exactly 2 years, 2 months, and 2 days, he lived fully and deeply inside his chosen room at Walden Pond. He faced the void, and he filled it with extreme intention. And the profound, unshakable truths that he discovered while sitting in that tiny wooden room are still actively sending massive, disruptive ripples through the fabric of time, shaking awake anyone who is finally ready to stop running. There is a highly calculated military concept that perfectly describes this philosophy. It is known by tacticians as the strategic retreat. It is a vital maneuver. When an army intentionally withdraws from the active front lines, it is not acting in cowardice. A strategic retreat is absolutely never an admission of bitter defeat. Instead, it is an act of profound cunning and long-term vision. The commanders deliberately pull their forces back to vastly stronger, far more defensible ground. They use this crucial time away from the chaotic bloodshed to heavily consolidate their dwindling resources. They rest their troops and repair their broken armor. Most importantly, they allow the arrogant enemy to foolishly overextend themselves. They watch as the opposing forces exhaust their energy, desperately chasing phantoms. And then when the time is perfectly right, they strike. From that highly protected, unbreachable position, they launch a massive assault with absolutely concentrated force. Henry David Thoreau's deeply boring, repetitive life at Walden Pond was the ultimate strategic retreat. He looked at the frantic, exhausting battlefield of modern society. He saw a bloody war being waged for empty status, crippling debt, and meaningless social prestige. He immediately realized it was a completely unwinnable, foolish conflict. He completely refused to fight on their heavily rigged terms. He refused to bleed for their hollow imaginary prizes, according to their deeply manipulative, invisible rules. So he tactically withdrew. He consolidated his precious time. He radically simplified his material needs. He strengthened his own psychological and spiritual defenses. And from that highly protected, fiercely guarded position, that tiny, unremarkable wooden cabin hidden deep in the quiet woods, he launched a devastating philosophical assault. He launched an intellectual strike on the entire massive, grinding machinery of unconscious human living. And we are still physically feeling the massive impact of that strike today. Modern society will eagerly try to tell you that living a quiet, boring life is a tragic failure of human ambition. They will say, you lack the hunger to achieve greatness. They are entirely wrong. A deliberately boring life is absolutely not a failure of ambition. It is in fact human ambition fundamentally refined to its absolute purest form. It is no longer a desperate, scattered ambition for blindly accumulating more. It is not the toxic ambition to collect more money, more shallow titles, or more heavy possessions. Instead, it is a laser-focused, relentless ambition for profound depth. It is an unyielding ambition for actual, undeniable meaning. It is the ambition to possess your own mind. It is the ultimate ambition to build a life that is actually authentically yours, rather than a cheap, mass-produced replica of a life handed down to you by a sick culture. Here is the deeply uncomfortable, undeniable truth that this entire philosophical exploration has been slowly circling. It is a truth that you already know, deep in your bones. Some quiet, hidden part of you completely understands everything being said here. The very part of you that clicked on this message and is still listening to these words knows. That specific, exhausted part of your soul deeply knows that you are currently trapped. You have physically and mentally felt the brutal, bone-crushing exhaustion of the treadmill. You have intimately experienced the deep, hollow emptiness of a calendar that is completely full of obligations, but entirely devoid of any actual joy or personal meaning. You have felt that strange, gnawing hunger in your chest late at night. It is a spiritual hunger that simply cannot ever be satisfied by anything the external world keeps offering. You cannot buy enough to fill that void. You cannot scroll enough to numb that specific pain. That profound, undeniable knowing inside of you is your ultimate internal compass. But simply possessing a compass is never enough to save a lost traveler. Knowing the truth and actively doing the truth are two entirely different, hostile countries. And the profound tragedy of the human condition is that the vast majority of people will comfortably live and quietly die in the massive, terrifying gap between knowing and doing. They will realize they are wasting their lives, yet they will completely refuse to change their daily habits. They will complain about the noise, yet they will never unplug the machine. Henry David Thoreau successfully crossed that terrifying gap. He did not cross it because he was somehow magically special or born with supernatural philosophical abilities. He did not cross it because he was vastly braver, inherently smarter, or significantly more spiritually enlightened than the average man walking the streets of his town. He crossed that massive divide because he was finally honest enough with himself to clearly admit exactly what he saw. He refused to lie to himself about the misery of the masses, and more importantly, he was deeply, relentlessly stubborn enough to actually take physical action on that harsh truth. The ultimate question you face today is whether you will do the same. Do not ever make the foolish mistake of believing that the simple life is actually simple because it is easy. It is absolutely not easy. It is the hardest path you can ever choose. It is only called simple because you have violently taken a blade and cut away absolutely everything that does not truly matter until only the raw, bleeding core remains. That kind of relentless philosophical cutting requires immense daily courage. It requires a terrifying level of crystal clear clarity about your own impending mortality. It requires a profound, ironclad willingness to be completely and utterly misunderstood by almost everyone you know. You must be willing to endure their mocking judgment. You must be perfectly willing to be called lazy, crazy, or boring by frantic people who are currently running around in exhausting, endless circles going absolutely nowhere. You must be entirely willing to be publicly labeled a massive failure by bitter people who have absolutely never once stopped to ask themselves what true success actually means. You must find the supreme courage to step firmly to the specific music that you hear. You must follow that rhythm, however faint it currently sounds under the roar of the machine. You must walk toward it, however far away it seems to be right now. You must step to that silent drumbeat, no matter how much the prospect of true freedom absolutely terrifies you. Because if these philosophical concepts have shifted something deep inside your chest today, you must understand that this realization is only scratching the very surface of reality. The truly dangerous ideas are not easily digested. The frameworks that actually dismantle the extraction system are the ones the architects desperately hope you never discover. The vast majority of modern people will always choose the comfortable lie. They will always prefer the warm, familiar numbness of the glowing screen over the harsh cold of the woods. But if you are fundamentally different, if that quiet, exhausted part of your soul actually wants to break the chains and take back control of your finite, precious attention, then you must commit to the strategic retreat. You must willingly and aggressively become the absolute most dangerous thing possible to a system perfectly designed to exploit your mind. You must completely refuse their metrics. You must fiercely protect your focus. You must step entirely out of their rigged game. You must become powerfully, radically, untouchably boring. Consider the profound brevity of your own existence. The Stoic philosophers of ancient Rome meditated on this daily. They called it memento mori. Remember that you must inevitably die. The system desperately wants you to completely forget your own mortality. It wants you to live as if you have an infinite number of days to waste on their trivial digital distractions. If you truly grasped how incredibly short your time on this earth actually is, you would never trade another irreplaceable hour of your life arguing with a nameless stranger online. You would immediately recognize that every single notification demanding your attention is a tiny, calculated theft of your extremely limited lifespan. It is literally stealing your life. To become boring to the algorithm is to fiercely reclaim your time. It is to draw an impenetrable fortress wall around your remaining days and stand guard at the gate with a drawn sword. You must look critically at the deeply ingrained habits that currently consume your evenings. The mindless scrolling, the binge-watching, the desperate need to constantly be entertained. These are not harmless ways to simply unwind after a long day of hard work. They are highly effective chemical anesthetics designed to keep you from realizing the agonizing pain of a wasted life. When you intentionally remove these digital anesthetics, you will initially feel a massive, terrifying wave of withdrawal. You will feel anxious, restless, and deeply uncomfortably bored. This acute discomfort is exactly where most weak-willed people immediately surrender. They panic at the stark silence and run, sprinting right back to the warm embrace of the distracting machine. But if you can endure that initial painful withdrawal, if you can stoically sit with the agonizing boredom without reaching for a device to instantly pacify your screaming nerves, you will eventually experience a profound, miraculous breakthrough. The chaotic noise in your head will slowly begin to settle. The thick mental fog of chronic overstimulation will finally lift. You will slowly begin to hear your own actual thoughts again. Not the recycled, highly engineered opinions of a social media feed, but the authentic, original voice of your own deep consciousness. This is the ultimate prize of the strategic retreat. It is the complete recovery of your own sovereign mind. And once you have finally tasted this immense silent freedom, you will never go back. You will look at the frantic, highly stimulated masses with deep, profound pity. You will see them staring blankly into their glowing rectangles, willingly trading their actual lives for cheap dopamine. You will see them constantly buying things they absolutely do not need, using money they do not actually have, simply to desperately impress people they do not even genuinely like. You will recognize this tragic spectacle for exactly what it is, a massive voluntary prison camp where the inmates actively fight each other to eagerly build their own invisible digital cell bars. Your deliberate refusal to participate in this madness will make you an outcast. The system absolutely hates an anomaly. It deeply despises anyone who proves that its rules are completely optional. When you stop frantically reacting to their manufactured outrages, they will loudly accuse you of being ignorant or deeply apathetic to the problems of the world. They will try to shame you into compliance. When you actively stop consuming their endless stream of useless products, the massive economic machinery will label you as a poor consumer, a bad citizen, and a complete failure of the capitalist model. When you completely stop seeking their shallow, fleeting validation, they will desperately try to brand you as an arrogant, antisocial recluse. They will use every weapon to drag you back into the chaos, but you must remain entirely unmoved by their frantic judgments. A massive, deeply rooted oak tree does not care about the chaotic buzzing of the tiny, short-lived insects flying around its solid trunk. You must cultivate that exact same unshakable wooden stoicism. Let them angrily call you boring. Let them mock your extreme simplicity. Let them loudly pity your apparent lack of modern, stressful ambition. Their hollow opinions hold absolutely no power over a mind that has completely conquered itself. Their digital metrics of success are utterly meaningless in the grand, sweeping context of human eternity. What truly matters is the undeniable quality of your own unclouded perception. What matters is the deep, deliberate intention behind your daily actions. What matters is the fierce ownership of your attention. Henry David Thoreau did not waste a single second of his 2 years at Walden Pond worrying if the gossiping townsfolk back in Concord thought his grand philosophical experiment was slightly too boring. He was far too busy engaging with the absolute raw essence of reality. He was far too deeply focused on striking the solid bedrock truth of existence to care about the shifting, meaningless opinions of the crowd. He understood that true lasting power is never found in dominating other people or amassing a massive fortune. True unshakable power is found entirely in mastering your own internal reactions to the world. It is found in achieving a state of complete emotional and psychological independence. It is the ability to walk through a screaming, chaotic marketplace and desire absolutely nothing that they are frantically selling. This level of profound independence makes you a ghost in their machine. You become completely invisible to the predatory algorithms that constantly scan the population for deep-seated insecurities and weak points to exploit. The complex algorithms cannot mathematically model a human being who lacks toxic greed. They cannot effectively target a mind that is fully content with silence. They cannot extract any value from a perfectly still soul. Therefore, the absolute greatest, most rebellious act of ultimate defiance you can possibly commit in the 21st century is to sit quietly in a room entirely by yourself and be completely unapologetically at peace. It is to reclaim your stolen focus from the wealthy tech billionaires and return it to your own immediate physical reality. It is to look closely at the actual faces of the real people sitting right in front of you. It is to feel the actual ground beneath your feet instead of living entirely inside a simulated digital projection of reality. It is to forcefully drag your consciousness back to the present physical moment. This is the brutal, demanding war that Thoreau spoke of. It is a daily, relentless battle for the sovereignty of your own mind. It is a fierce fight against the incredibly powerful forces of psychological extraction. Every single time you intentionally leave your phone in another room, you win a crucial battle. Every time you stare out a window instead of desperately scrolling a feed, you reclaim a piece of your occupied territory. Every time you choose to embrace the terrifying silence of boredom over the cheap distraction of constant noise, You are actively starving the massive beast that feeds entirely on your fractured, divided attention. Do not ever underestimate the staggering world-shifting power of this quiet, daily resistance. The system is incredibly fragile. It requires your absolute continuous participation and compliance to survive. If enough individuals quietly choose to execute this strategic retreat, if enough minds forcefully detach from the massive humming hive, the entire exploitative machine will slowly grind to an absolute halt. But you cannot wait for the masses to wake up. You must lead the strategic retreat in your own life immediately. You must pick up your own philosophical axe and walk into your own version of the quiet, secluded woods. You must ruthlessly cut away the heavy, suffocating deadwood of external expectations. You must violently tear down the fake, hollow structures of manufactured desire that have been artificially implanted in your brain. You must dig deeply through the toxic, accumulated mud of modern, frantic culture until you finally strike the hard, unyielding bedrock of your own true, authentic nature. And then you must build your fortress there. Build it with intense, deliberate focus. Build it with unshakable, stoic discipline. Build it with a radical, uncompromising commitment to the profound, terrifying beauty of a truly simple, unmedicated existence. Let the terrified, exhausted world continue to spin frantically out of control around you. Let the desperate masses continue to blindly chase the glowing mirages right off the edge of the psychological cliff. You will not join them in the fall. You will remain standing completely firm. You will remain intensely awake. You will remain powerfully, strategically, and beautifully boring. And in doing so, you will finally be free. Consider the sheer, staggering arrogance of the extraction machine. It genuinely believes it can mathematically map the entire human soul. It believes your deepest desires can be reduced to a string of binary code. It assumes that you are nothing more than a highly predictable, easily manipulated bundle of simple biological reflexes. It views your profound human consciousness as merely a natural resource to be aggressively mined. To passively accept this degrading fate is the ultimate, unforgivable betrayal of your own inherent human dignity. You are not a data point. You are not a targeted consumer profile. You are a sovereign, rational being. You possess a mind capable of grasping the infinite. You possess a will capable of overriding the most deeply ingrained biological instincts. You possess the incredible power of conscious, deliberate, unyielding choice. Every moment you spend in radical, boring simplicity is a powerful reassertion of that divine sovereignty. It is a quiet but incredibly forceful declaration of independence from the empire of noise and endless distraction. It is a return to the absolute fundamental truth of nature. The quietest, most unremarkable things in the natural world are almost always the most enduring and the most powerful. True power rarely needs to shout. The massive, solid mountains do not frantically scream for your attention. The deep, expansive oceans do not send you urgent, flashing notifications to remind you of their immense, terrifying, world-swallowing depth. They simply exist. They endure in massive, silent, boring majesty while the chaotic storms temporarily rage across their surfaces and then, inevitably, completely vanish into absolute nothingness, forgotten by time. You must strive to become exactly like the mountain. You must become the deep, unmoving ocean. Let the frantic, chaotic storms of modern digital culture rage furiously around you without ever moving your solid core. Let the manufactured, screaming outrage cycles completely burn themselves out against the thick, impenetrable walls of your cultivated indifference. Let the frantic, desperate marketers completely waste their massive budgets. They will eventually realize that their incredibly sophisticated psychological weapons are completely useless against a mind that has already willingly stripped itself of absolutely every single artificial desire and fear. This is the ultimate, unassailable fortress. This is the final, unconquerable frontier of human freedom in the modern, hyper-connected age. It is not found in fleeing to Mars or building massive underground bunkers. True freedom is found sitting perfectly still in a quiet, empty room, requiring absolutely nothing from the outside world to feel completely whole, entirely complete, and profoundly, fiercely, undeniably alive. Remember the core, unshakable truth that Henry David Thoreau carried out of the woods of Walden Pond. Remember the ultimate lesson of his deeply calculated, profoundly successful strategic retreat from society. The absolute most dangerous thing you can ever possibly do to a massive global system that is perfectly designed to exploit your mind and harvest your soul is to simply refuse to play their game. Become boring. Become completely radically and relentlessly boring. Do not break. Do not surrender. Do not let the fire of your consciousness be extinguished by their digital flood. Stand firm. Embrace the silence. Take back your life.